Hi, my name is Nickole Brown. To those of you who know Brigit Pegeen Kelly's poem, Song, I'm going to tell you something that might not exactly make sense, at least not at first. I mean, to most, her poem is a fable of sorts. It's a brutal and strange tale of profound moral imagination, a surreal and grim story that holds in its magic a lesson about the aftershock and consequence of brutality. And yes, those descriptions, they're apt. It is all of those things. But to me, it was and always has been an ars poetica, a poem about poetry itself, a poem that acts as a guide to the art of writing, because for me it taps into the core of why I write in the first place and maybe even how to write. You see, when I first encountered this piece, this legendary poem, I was only in my 20s. I was fractured in more ways than I care to articulate, or that I even could have articulated back then. And I was fractured mostly from a childhood of abuse and the veils of secrecy that had shrouded me so long I could barely see in front of my own face. I had grown up and left the house that held those memories, but I couldn't leave the house of my own body. And that was the problem. And of course, the heart within me was kind of like a caged animal. It was battering itself against the walls, frantic to escape. And it showed in every line I wrote. This was when, by some miracle, I had the good sense to sign up for a class with Belgian-American poet Laurent Bosselaar. It was her practice that summer to start each session not by greeting us with a general hello, but by reading us a poem. And with no preamble or any kind of explanation, she knocked down the gates of each quotidian morning, bringing us to a place, bringing us to the place that mattered. One particular morning, she began with Kelly's poem. And she began, as Kelly's poem does, with that imperative, with that singular plea most any poem makes to its reader. Listen, Laurent read. That one word, that first word of the poem. And that listen wasn't a request, but a sort of demand. It was a demand followed by a colon that signified that everything that comes after should be heard. Listen, she read. Listen. There was a goat's head hanging in ropes by a tree. That is how the poem opens, saying the horrible fact of things clear and plain in a way that I'd never been able to say about my own life. As in, listen, my stepfather, he sexually molested me for 2 of my earliest years, and I don't know how to survive it. In one unbroken and unrelenting stanza that follows, the poem then moves forward from that first line to tell you what happened to the goat, detailing a gruesome prank done by boys who likely thought their massacre a kind of lark, and later found that prank to be harder work than they imagined, who finished the job and then ran off into the darkness that seems to hide everything, thinking they'd gotten away with what they'd done. But then there's what holds court over the entire poem, and that's the title, Song. The title emphasizes what happens next, that the goat's head and the goat's body, one hanging in a tree and the other down by the tracks, make a kind of song. The head called to the body to the head, it reads, because they missed each other. And they missed each other in the same way that my own head and own body, torn asunder by what had happened to me, yearned to be reconnected. It's this title, this song, that culminates in the poem's last lines. Not a cruel song, Kelly writes. No, no, not cruel at all. This song is sweet. It is sweet. The heart dies of this sweetness. And this is what haunts the boys long after, waking them in the night, long after the ropes were down. It's the song that teaches them. They would learn to listen, she writes. They would remember their own mothers. It's with this poem I too began to learn. I learned what I needed to do. I too needed to sing, and I needed to sing sweetly, to call forth the grief of the little girl who named her goat Broken Thorn Sweet Blackberry. I needed to stitch my body back together with a song that called back and forth to one another, with a song that was not raging or roiling with self-pity, but tempered with the kind of forgiveness that recognized the toxic masculinity that fosters such crimes. Sweetened not out of revenge to hurt those who had hurt me, but the kind of sweetness that might also have my own heart fly out of my body toward my head, a heart that flew as a bird flies back to its cage and the familiar perch from which it trills. This poem then became my guide. It became my Ars Poetica. It helped me learn how, from the shreds and tatters of my own life, to sing. It's the poem, of course, I so wish I would have read years before I did. And that's why I'm sharing it with you now, that it might too help you. Here then is the poem. Song by Brigit Pegeen Kelly. Listen. There was a goat's head hanging by ropes in a tree. All night it hung there and sang. And those who heard it felt a hurt in their hearts and thought they were hearing the song of a night bird. They sat up in their beds and then they lay back down again. In the night wind, the goat's head swayed back and forth, and from far off it shone faintly the way the moonlight shone on the train track miles away, beside which the goat's headless body lay. Some boys had hacked its head off. It was harder work than they had imagined. The goat cried like a man and struggled hard. But they finished the job. They hung the bleeding head by the school and then ran off into the darkness that seems to hide everything. The head hung in the tree. The body lay by the tracks. The head called to the body to the head. They missed each other. The missing grew large between them until it pulled the heart right out of the body, until the drawn heart flew toward the head, flew as a bird flies back to its cage in the familiar perch from which it trills. Then the heart sang in the head, softly at first and then louder, sang long and low until the morning light came up over the school and over the tree, and then the singing stopped. The goat had belonged to a small girl. She named the goat Broken Thorn Sweet Blackberry, named it after the night's bush of stars, because the goat's silky hair was dark as well water, because it had eyes like wild fruit. The girl lived near a high railroad track. At night she heard the trains passing, the sweet sound of the train's horn pouring slowly over her bed, and each morning she woke to give the bleeding goat his pail of warm milk. She sang him songs about girls with ropes and cooks and boats. She brushed him with a stiff brush. She dreamed daily that he grew bigger, and he did. She thought her dreaming made it so. But one night the girl didn't hear the train's horn, and the next morning she woke to an empty yard. The goat was gone. Everything looked strange. It was as if a storm had passed through while she slept, wind and stones, rain stripping the branches of fruit. She knew that someone had stolen the goat and that he had come to harm. She called to him. All morning and into the afternoon she called and called. She walked and walked, in her chest a bad feeling like the feeling of the stones gouging the soft undersides of her bare feet. Then somebody found the goat's body by the high tracks, the flies already filling their soft bottles at the goat's torn neck. Then somebody found the head hanging in a tree by the school. They hurried to take these things away so that the girl would not see them. They hurried to raise money to buy the goat, buy the girl another goat. They hurried to find the boys who had done this, to hear them say, "It was a joke. A joke. It was nothing but a joke." But listen. Here is the point. The boys thought to have their fun and be done with it. It was harder work than they had imagined, this silly sacrifice, but they finished the job whistling as they washed their large hands in the dark. What they didn't know was that the goat's head was already singing behind them in a tree. What they didn't know was that the goat's head would go on singing just for them, long after the ropes were down, and that they would learn to listen, pail after pail, stroke after patient stroke. They would wake in the night thinking they heard the wind in the trees or a night bird, but their hearts beating harder. There would be a whistle, a hum, a high murmur, and at last, a song. The low song a lost boy sings, remembering his mother's call. Not a cruel song. No, not cruel at all. This song is sweet. It is sweet. The heart dies of this sweetness.